Welcome back to another episode of Music is My Mantra. Today we have a very special guest, Erin Cutrone, who specializes in working with the nervous system, which I love this topic. I've done some work around that myself, but I feel like it's a constant journey. I'm really excited to have you on today and to learn more about your work and your story and talk about all things music and wellness. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. And I love this too, because when we were speaking about music specifically, like so much of my work is not necessarily music, but more in vibration and in mantra and word. And so I'm really excited to see where we go today.
Yeah, me too. I know that, most people think of music like the music industry or singing like American Idol. And that's something that at every one of my shows that I do when I perform, I usually try to get the audience to sing along with me, because I do know that when you sing together, it's part of regulating the nervous system together.
Yeah.
And I just love that. And I feel it. I grew up singing in church, so that was just ingrained in me from a young age. And I know that you have some powerful turning moments in your story through music as well. So let's start. It doesn't have to be from the very beginning, but tell us a little bit about how you got into becoming a therapist and working with the nervous system.
Yes. So let's see. Let me rewind. So I've been a therapist for almost 20 years at this point. So it was something that I just intuitively was pulled towards, my knack for curiosity, how the body and brain work together. I grew up in a household with a lot of, let's say, dysregulation. And, where most people look at me and they're like, oh, but you're so like calm and you're so cool and collected. And it's like, yes, you can present a certain way, but the body also goes through something very different, or the mind, what you cannot see.
Yeah.
So I also have had my own experiences in trauma, let's say. And so those have posed always trying to understand like what is actually happening in my body that like a talk therapy really wasn't getting to the root of, so I started out, and I always say as first step was bartender and just like hearing people's stories and being able to just relate to people.
Honestly, that's good training.
Oh yeah. And I was like, wait a minute, I can really get paid for this.
Yeah.
So that was my study, psychology, right out of the gate. I moved right into my field right away. And some of the things, and this lends to also the work in the nervous system, but at a very young age, I was working in, psychiatric hospitals. I've worked with foster youth. I was working even in private practice. And I remember in all of those settings, they would look at me like, you need to dress older. Like, how are you doing this work? Like, you're making all of this progress with people, but you're right out of school. How are you doing this?
They're totally judging you for it.
And a lot of it, I remember very distinct moments where I would be, in a one-on-one, and something would just come through, these words that I would never even speak. And I'm like, and they're like, oh, totally. And I'm like, oh, you understand that? Like, those are not my words. Where did that come from? Yeah. And so I have a feeling too, some of this conversation might lend into music as creative, as intuitive, being more of like these open conduits, which also comes back to the nervous system. And I was, so open at that time that things would just come through me where I'm like, I don't know. That was not my brain that made that word,
That's so cool. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think that relates to, like when I'm writing music, if I can just get out of my own way and let things flow and not judge it, like I have a song in an hour,
Yes. Yes.
And it definitely feels like it's inspired by something inside of me, but it does come from like a different place.
And often we cannot access that place. And again, just tapping back into why I bring so much back to the nervous system. And, I use the work of Stephen Porges, who does the polyvagal theory, which I've learned to just be like, the science of safety and danger. our nervous system, what happens when your nervous system is in that state of threat or survival or danger. We don't need that circuitry online. We don't need curiosity. We don't need intuition. We need like run as fast as you can, fight as hard as you can. And so when we have that awareness, then we can learn, oh, I'm in this system. How do I get back over? And talk therapy can't penetrate that the same,
It's so interesting that you say that, because I had an experience when I was in college where I was suffering from burnout and just pushing myself too hard. And it wasn't like talk therapy, just it didn't click. And it was getting me more frustrated, and I felt even more judged, And I finally started working with a person that was a little bit more of a naturopath, and he worked with hypnotherapy. And so that was my very first, I had no idea that was tapping into the nervous system that time. But I do remember feeling like, wow, I can actually rest for once. And that changed my life,
And not to, there is a place for it. So I don't want the listeners to be like, oh, here's this therapist that isn't for it. Yeah. But what can happen often is that it's triggering that system. Like the brain doesn't know the difference between the memory from the experience, from the future, from the past, or real time. So it starts to activate physiologically in the body that same event. And so if we don't have that awareness to say, and I think this is where with like a lot of the, deeper traumas or PTSD, they're using some of that ketamine or, even psychedelics now, where it's like helping the body learn like you can be safe and access that.
Yeah.
But I think we can also access that, like with you're saying, with hypnotism, with nervous system, with breath even.
Yeah. And I know that your background is in yoga and meditation as well. Mm-hmm. So has that always been with you, or was that something that you sort of picked up along the journey of jumping into therapy work?
I think, and it's so interesting because I'm a Capricorn by nature. So I like order and planning and structure and, all checking the boxes to get there. But a lot of this journey has just been like following the impulse of, oh, here's this teacher who is speaking to, like my teachers spoke a lot to deeper systems. And that's actually how I found the flower essences and the subtle body. And so it wasn't so much teaching the movements, it was the energetics underneath it that I was drawn to. It was like, whoa, how is this moving the body differently? What is being stored in different places of the body, in organs and meridians?
Cool.
So yeah, just like, okay, this feels right. And again, that when our body is in so much trauma or chronic stress or, the world today, we often lose that connection to those systems that really is our natural way.
Yeah, of discerning our decision-making process.
And trusting it, that it's not, and I've had people my whole life like, oh, here's another study, here's another thing you're doing, here's another place you're living. And really coming to trust my own movements that don't fit into the norm. I've always lived outside of the box. And so to use, not that is a good thing or a bad thing, but to use that as my barometer would be a disservice to me. My body needs to move differently. My brain needs to move differently. And so even just simply that, when I was young, working with kids and teenagers, that permission slip to just be wild and creative. And like, why are you trying to fit into that box that is not even where you want to be,
Yeah. And you were, like you said, seeing results, from the get-go. So that's pretty awesome.
And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, literally just giving permission for them to be themselves, like, okay. And we do this even today here with, I've used different language here and I've catered it to, a different clientele, not so much the teenagers anymore, but it's the same thing. It's like we're working with the mechanisms and the shadow parts and the defense systems and all of those, I call them adaptations that our body had to learn how to do to stay safe.
Yeah.
Instead of judge it, like welcome that in. Let's let that be here. Like not to feel a sense of shame, not to feel this sense of embarrassment. It's the thing you had to do to survive. Yeah. And now with a different brain and a different nervous system, we can train it to move differently. So it becomes this beautiful communication with our body.
Instead of just numbing it or ignoring it, right? Yeah.
And as a supervisor, I'm training now clinicians in my work, and it's so counterintuitive to what they're being taught. It's like this cut and paste, oh, they have this symptom or this going on, apply this. And I'm like, okay, so you're doing all that and it's not working. Why? We're not getting to the root. And it's really, how do we start to peel back the layers to get to that deeper root? And it will always come back to the nervous system, the connective tissue, the way the body's communicating, and the way the brain then has space to either be more constructively creative or destructively creative.
That's really interesting. When you're training these new practitioners, is there like a moment where it clicks and they start getting it? Or is it more of like, how do you teach somebody to be more intuitive?
I know it's always a unique take, because, even amongst other clinicians, I think I get most judgments and criticisms from colleagues. And so obviously, I've catered it so they know my work a little bit more. They know what they're getting into. But it's counterintuitive to what our school of medicine is. This is a lot of our schools of medicine.
Yeah.
And I actually started teaching workshops on this. And how I help in the best way is what I call applied kinesiology. Do you know this?
Okay.
Or like muscle testing.
Yeah.
So, and I do this in my work too, and there are different, I guess, tools or techniques that we can work with the body to kind of rewire. So most of our, let's say, faulty thinking, or I call it like the thought loop, is very unilateral in our body. So it's one-sided. And so there are, if we're working with the energetic body, different movements that we can make that kind of crisscross the body a little bit, and kind of, I always think of it like a hose. If you like clamp it, and then when you release it, everything starts to flow again. So it starts to let that movement become more bilateral, which is also a lot of the nervous system work, is bilateral stimulation. So it's moving people out of that singular loop. But I do that with movement of saying very specific words. And we start with yes or no. And so we'll stand in a very neutral posture and just recite this word, yes, 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 yes. And just notice any sensations.
Yeah.
Is it, and I don't like kind of give instruction here, just notice what happens in your body. And then for contrast, we're going to say no, 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 no. And just start to tune in. And what we're doing is I have to quiet the activity of the cerebral mind, right? Just notice and observe. And so we start to eliminate mind activity, which is, could be yoga, it could be meditation, it could be breath. We're just trying to quiet that activity of story, of expectation, of roles that we've played, and just sense into it. And there's no right or wrong. And then we do it again. And then we start to use different words. Usually our name is the next one. It's like, okay, so start with, like, for me, I'd say, my name is Erin, my name is Erin, my name is Erin. What happens? And then my name is Courtney, my name is Courtney, my name is Courtney. My body's going to start to move differently. And so we're starting to tap into a deeper truth than like my brain,
Yeah. That's so cool. So when you're starting with a new client, or maybe you've been working with them for a while, is this also similar to the process of beginning? Like, do you teach them that as well?
So
Does it look a little different?
It looks a little bit different. And I always tell my clients, and they're like, you're not like any other therapist. And I'm like, I know. This is like, I take this as a compliment.
Yeah.
But they get it. I combine it, and I'm always weaving, some of these backgrounds. And it's all within my scope. I've made sure in my work that I can still be clinical, because I take insurance out of New York State. So I've done all of the curriculums to make sure I stay in the box, but also expand the box.
Yeah.
And then I've also moved towards coaching, where that's where I can just be totally free. Yeah. And I find that I'm leaning more towards that as I grow. And I can cross state lines, and I can help people like globally, and it becomes really, really beautiful work. Yeah. But we were chatting about this the other day. I start with some of the sciences, where one of the most pivotal things that I found that changed how I worked forever was the work of Masaru Emoto, and that's the hidden messages in water. And so when I give them this visual, and there's videos and there's books, but when you have the visual, and if the listeners don't know who that is and this work, basically what
once on an earlier episode, but
oh yeah, okay, cool.
So it'll be good to hear you explain it as well.
Okay, cool. So in my understandings, in my language, just very simply, Masaru Emoto was the scientist who was studying water, and more specifically how vibration impacted water. And so what he would do he would freeze water molecules. Well, I guess he would expose water to spoken word, to written word, to visuals, and then he would find this temperature where it would start to freeze and crystallize. And he was taking photographs. So I think it was like a camera attached to a microscope. And he was taking photographs of this water really at its like cellular and molecular levels, right? The structure of water. And over and over and over again, he was finding that words and imagery that was collaborative, uplifting. I love you. You're so cute. We would have this very distinct structure. And so like I would call them snowflakes. And I would do this with my kids. I would do this with every age, because when you see it, it's very hard to unsee. Yeah. So these structures that look like very distinct snowflakes. And then words that were, let's say, more negative or not collaborative, or order, like giving an order. I hate you, you're ugly, you're so foolish. They would almost start to disintegrate. And there was no structure to this water. And so when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute, this is water outside of us. If we are predominantly water, think about the structure of water. If those snowflakes are interlocked, they're so much stronger. Yes. And if they are dissolved, like, of course, we're going to feel weaker. And so that is the science behind the applied kinesiology, that our body is actually stronger when we're tapping into a deeper truth versus our cognitive, imprint of something.
Very cool. Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down. And I believe he also did that for music. It was classical music versus like heavy metal. And you see the difference where the heavy metal is very chaotic, and
yes,
the classical is beautiful, crystalline,
yes,
perfect pattern. So yeah, it's fascinating.
I was just listening to something the other day, and they were speaking to, at some point in time, and I don't know, I don't have like the specifics to this, we can all kind of dig into it deeper, but that they actually changed the frequency of hertz that music and film and all of this is now being displayed and portrayed. So if you dive into that deeper, where something that could have been a little bit more healing is a little bit less healing now, let's say. Like, I don't like to say destructive, but I use a lot of words of like creative, or I do use destructive sometimes, or against us, or more or less power, right? So if we are more in that creative energy, and this then kind of weaves into the work of David Hawkins, who does the scale of consciousness and has also, I call it the frequency of emotions, but his scale of consciousness maps out numbers, hertz, to different emotions. And so I use that in my work a lot as well, to see, okay, well, when we drop into shame, it's so easy because it's at a vibration of like 20. And so I've called that scale, where it's like more or less power, where that scale begins to tip is at 200. And 200 is courage. And so I love that, because it's like courage to try something different, courage to, be open to hearing something different. But even higher than that, so when the scale has tipped now at 250, you're in more creative, more empowered spaces, is neutrality. And I thought that was so interesting, that neutrality holds a higher frequency than courage.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I've seen that before too, and I've never really noticed that is the way it is. But I guess if you think about it, courage, it's sort of refreshing almost, because even when if you're having a bad day or you're feeling all these heavier frequencies, like you don't, it feels like the scale actually, to me, in logical thinking anyway, the scale would tip at neutral, right? But it's courage. Yeah. And it's lower frequency even.
And I never say like positive or negative. I don't think things are good or bad, but when we can reframe it to more or less power, lighter or heavier, like that's something like notice in your body when we feel shame or guilt, like you can feel that density. It's heavy. But when we understand it to be that frequency impacts the water in our bodies, like moment to moment, that's how quickly we can shift that. And that neutrality. And this is so much of what I tell my clients, because we read all the books and we do all the podcasts and we're trying all the strategies, we're taking all the things, and it's like less. And so neutrality to me is least amount of effort, right? It's just this thing. Don't assign the value to it. And it's the value that we assign to it that starts to shift what that thing means. So it's like least possible effort, or like neutral point is our most easily accessible point of power.
And we can have courage before we even feel powerful. I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier. It's like, what are the words there?
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, and my brain is going to like thinking of like music. I use music notes specifically to match our thoughts. So if my thoughts are coming in, it's like da 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 da. I can't really, sometimes it becomes one long line of note, where if we start to have those points of entry or pauses, now we have something else that can either go there or nothing. And in that nothing is where that wisdom comes in, is where that higher something. So I'm just thinking, even in that form of music, for the creatives, whether it's singing or writing or creating the music, that courage first before you hit that power. Like, I love that visual.
Yeah, that is really cool. And it's so true. Because for me, at least, if I'm not feeling brave enough to share, that's when I get into that analytical overthinking, judging every single little thing that comes out, and the editing process is just, I think it's okay to be somewhat critical, but to actually just let it flow, like you kind of have to start with that to get any momentum.
Yes. And I say often, like, to move out of the mind. So a lot of the strategies I use are bottom up first, meaning we're going to use the body, both the nervous system, but even I look at posture often, where that's something that is tangible that you can see. If I say, what's the thought? What's the feeling? It's like, we can get there. But if I say, what are your shoulders doing? You know that immediately. If I say, if you look at your posture, are you leaning forward or are you kind of hunched over? You can see that immediately, right? So can I lift your posture, lean? Most of us, we're forward thinkers. We're worried about what's next. We're planning. Most of us actually lean forward slightly. Or I use that as like my symptomology is like, or that hunched over is often protective of organs or stuck in old story, depressed, right? The body mirrors that. So a bottom up is if I can tune into that and change my posture, it's starting to send signals to my brain differently than what it was before, almost instantly. So we change, the brain circuitry just by moving the body.
Wow.
Yeah.
It seems so simple, but it's like so profound,
Well, because what we don't realize is, like you said, in those pauses, if we don't learn how to practice, and mindfulness is a huge piece of my work as well, of that awareness, the brain is going to match the energy of the body. So even tuning in for, let's say, listeners are creatives or writers or musicians, like tuning into your body posture as you write that song, as you sing. And I'm sure you notice this too, like if you take up more space to practice, you're going to have a different breath completely. So whether you're sending that word out or, singing that sound, I'd say for all of the listeners, just that's one of my go-tos is tune into your body periodically throughout the day. Every time you take a sip of water, start with the bottom, start with the body. And then that's going to access like, oh, I don't have to know what's going on up there. I can tell just by body posture,
Yeah, just check in with yourself. I mean, even that is just hard sometimes, right? When we're just go, 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 go.
Yes, totally. And that's sometimes why I think, that my style of medicine, I call it, how am I going to charge for that? Like, all you do is check in with your body and reset it, talk to it, communicate with it. Like, we don't need all of the prescriptions and all of that. Like, can they be supplemental? Of course. But that's free medicine. There's not a profit there to be in the bigger scope of wellness,
Totally. Yeah. I know. That's honestly, even when I was going through this burnout experience in college, I didn't have one person be like, oh, you just need to sleep more. Like the person I ended up working with, the hypnotherapist, definitely helped me to realize that I needed to slow down. Everyone was always like, oh, you're doing so much. You're rewarding.
Yes. Yes, that productivity mind. Yeah. And it's interesting, when I was teaching yoga, I taught a very specific style of yoga called yin yoga. And yin yoga, we are holding poses for like 3 to 5 minutes. And when I would tell people this, they're like, oh no, I can't do that. That is not for me. And I'm like, oh, that's because we need it, right? We have so much resistance to that stillness and to that slowing down. And that's where so much of our power is. Those notes on that sheet of paper make such a bigger difference when they have the spaces between them. That's where we access. Same in our mind. So letting the body learn. And I use the word convince a lot. Like, we're convincing the body that it is safe enough to slow down. It is safe enough to explore, right? Creativity, connection. Like, this goes back to nervous system circuitry. So if our body is in constant activation, it is not meant to be in that state of survival. All of those systems go offline. Learning, we don't need to learn in that system. So we send these kids to school and expect them to learn, and their little systems are super activated. They're picking up energetically, whether or not they know it, the movements of the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Immune system, I say that a lot. That's why I speak to just learning a little bit deeper about those. I really simplify it to survival and safety systems.
Okay.
But when we're in that survival system, immune system goes offline, thinking brain goes offline, digestion goes offline, reproduction goes offline, social engagement goes offline. And so when we're talking wellness, we have to start speaking more about that nervous system and how to activate the safety system.
Yeah.
I just see that through and through.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is so relatable. I growing up in my 20s in New York City, it was like kind of a constant struggle. And I think I've always, since college, have been really focused on finding that healthier balance. But it's tough when you're already kind of like, all of the systems are pushed to the limit already. And what can you do? I guess just start checking in with yourself, but it does feel counterintuitive. It feels like I remember, I need to do more. That's always the first thing that, not anymore, but definitely my 20s. That was the.
And that's funny because I'm from New York originally. My practice is out of New York. So they're my favorite to work with because their systems are just so primed for baseline. That's baseline. So when I'm trying to teach them and their bodies to slow down, like, they don't even realize how fast they're thinking, how fast they're moving, how fast they're acting out on taking that initiative or impulse. And so that I am very intentional when I'm speaking with them of, like, I can sense them sometimes, like, spit it out, get it out. And I'm teaching them in these sessions to just like move slower. And every time, the signals of the body when it moves into the parasympathetic state or the safety system is a spontaneous breath. You take a big sigh, right? And that I'll make people, they'll yawn, right? They'll hear the stomach start to gurgle. And I'm like, yes. that's your body that we've just kicked into. And the first thing that they say is like, you're so easy to talk to. It's so relaxing. Yes. Like it's like the thing we want, but we're so afraid of, so making it okay to do this. Like we're accessing it every session. It's giving them information of the other side.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And really, it is just such a cultural, like the opposite of, I don't know if there's ever been a time when we have been in touch with our bodies, but it's really awesome to see that that's finally becoming more common knowledge, at least from my perspective.
And I love that too, because these are like thoughts and contemplations that I have all of the time. We live in a survival state.
Yeah.
But does that mean we're actually surviving? And so traditionally, the system we need to be in is that parasympathetic, is the safety system to discern. Like I think of this in Florida, I was going for a walk and I'm like, okay, I know there's gators everywhere, right? Or when I was in California, the bears, when you go for walks in the woods. Mm-hmm. And if you watch, I look to the laws of nature more often than not. It's like, what are the trees doing? What are the animals doing? An animal isn't going to attack just to attack. Yeah. They kind of like hang back and they suss it out. And then it's like, okay, if I'm in actual danger, now I'm going to take action. Yeah. And that's how those systems are supposed to work. We're supposed to be in our safety system, tap into that other system when we need it, and then come back.
Just and not always there.
And not live there chronically. And I find so many people and it doesn't have to be like, I always say like big traumas or the things that people think when I talk about trauma. Yeah. Trauma to me.
For us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and so many people have different descriptions or different, terminology, but the way that I see it is it's a disconnection from self, a disconnection from safety, a disconnection from support. Right. So when we do like trauma study, it's not necessarily the thing that happens. It's what was the foundation of that. So if I have a safety net, if I have a support system, chances are I may not develop trauma-like symptoms. I may be able to just recover from that differently. Yeah. And this is the work of Gabor Maté speaks a lot to this when he's speaking about war veterans. Why do some war veterans, they go to the same war, they have the same experiences? Well, the difference is the undercurrent. What was the foundation? It's not the what that happens, it's the foundation.
Yeah, where did they come from? What previous experience they had leading up to it? Or even the people around them probably have a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And disconnection from self, I say a lot of times, is we grow up in these environments of expectation. And so if I shut myself down to meet your expectation, I'm going to experience symptoms somewhere down the line because I'm not being authentic. And so a lot of my work is how do we tap back into that authenticity that is you and let those voices be there, but not so loud, and to me, that always comes back to the nervous system because this is safety and danger. And the nervous system does not know time. So as a child, as an infant even, we need that person and that sense of acceptance, that belonging for survival.
Yes.
But the nervous system doesn't know that we're fast forward 2025 and we're adults and we can actually buy our own food and get ourselves around and resource. So it's this conversation with the nervous system to say, oh, I see why you feel the need to do that as an infant, as a child, as a 4-year-old, as a 7-year-old, as a 14-year-old. But now we kind of untether from that and like restructure that system to say like, I want you to be my friend, or I want this job, or I want this thing, but I don't need it as survival. So like it's always coming back to playing this like sweet little dance between, old and new and current,
and recognizing where you've come from, what experiences you had, or like you were saying earlier, looking at these things without heavy emotions tied to them, like just honoring that that's where you came from, and now it can be something that you learn from if you let it.
Yes. And it's just coming back to that nervous system again, that when that survival system is on, or when those lower density, let's say, emotions come on, it's so much harder to access that like higher frequency. But I always say that we're tapping into the heart as well. Like those experiences for a lot of us have hurt our hearts, right? And so now we're trying to tap into higher heart qualities. In survival, we don't need compassion. Compassion circuitry is offline. So when we bring that system back into safety and play there in I always use the word play because I'm like, I don't want this to be work. We work all the time. This is play. Play, explore, like curiosity. That's activating. Those are bottom up ways to activate all of these other systems coming back online. Just be curious. It's neutral. It doesn't mean anything. It's just play with that.
I love that you used the word play. I had a beautiful human on the podcast about a month ago, Nikia Fields, and she's a certified play therapist. And so,
I heard that one.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we talked a lot about like what that meant for her and her work and that sort of thing. And it's just, I think that curiosity and that removal of judgment, like that is something that also I think comes so engraved in us, like almost just as much as, at least for me, as much as the fight or flight and wanting to push myself into the fight because that's where I'm most productive, right? And it's, I know that that's not, I don't think it's really who we are as human beings, because I believe that we are creative and, but it's like we've had to sort of, the culture itself doesn't really support play, Yeah.
And for a lot of people, I find that not only societally have we become like productivity oriented and outcome based oriented, right? Like think about school age, it's grades, like we're taught this, it's embedded into our brains that there is an order to this. But there's a piece of childhood and child development where, if you watch them play, they're not playing to have a perfect A. They're just mixing colors and they don't really care, right? They're not no outcome. And so if we can start to practice, and so much of this work, is I just take that from yoga, it is a practice to get to these states that this is no longer our intuitive way. We have lost that along the way, but we had it. So a lot of this work is just a remembrance. So if at some point in time we didn't get to play to just play, and that's a lot of my clients who come from a lot of, let's say, dysregulated homes, or, we can term it however, they didn't learn how to play to just play. It's the mess, they have to clean it up. It's in this way. And so taking on, and I always say that the easiest way to access this is literally like hold an infant, right? And whether they're really there or not, we would talk to that infant and we would treat that infant and that child so differently, right? So I say this with little kids when they go to school at school age and they're going into like preschool for the first time and they're petrified, right? It's not like, oh, yay, preschool. Some of them are like, I don't know this. And we're like, oh, but come on in, it's preschool. But it's all of these other kids and there's a lot of noises and there's so much stimulation and I don't know these people. And so we wouldn't like force them to go in. We convince them, I'll stay with you. Come on, I know it is scary. So if we can externalize a lot of the language first, I find it's easier to internalize. So if we were talking to an infant or a child, if we literally take that same intonation and actual vocabulary, and this is again the work of Stephen Porges, he calls it now the safe and sound protocol, that lullaby and that intonation we use with children actually does soothe their system. So we can, I call it reparenting, we can do that same thing to our system. So externalize it. How would you speak to a child or your pet even? Like we are so sweet to these little things. And so externalize to internalize.
That actually is a study. That's so interesting.
That's
really
yes,
cool.
The lullaby.
Yeah. And so you encourage the people that you're working with to speak to themselves in this way.
And so that like tends to or lends to the sound. That's the vibration. That's the music. That sound can be so healing. And now listeners have a little bit of science because it's actually penetrating the cells. The water is changing in its molecular structure.
Is that part of why, like in the study that you just referenced with, speaking, like you can call it your baby voice or like the dog voice is that is so true for me. Is it the energy behind the words, or is it the change in tonation, or both?
I think it's both. I think it's both because there's so much work. So now we go a layer deeper. And what I love the most about the yoga studies is the energy anatomy. And we call that the subtle body. And so I've learned the subtle body to be, what people call your aura or your energetic field, that this is all measurable now. When I started, it was woo-woo and I was weird. And now there's all science backing it, so it's great.
It's awesome.
But that subtle body I call the nervous system's nervous system. So that extension is always like sensing for danger. That's where we get those intuitive hits, or why we can see somebody and just feel unsafe for some reason. It's an extension of our knowing, and that's picking up vibration. So I see that as like, for some of the listeners that listen to radio, like we can change that channel and get back a completely different frequency. So I think frequency plays a lot in that, but that's in the vein of intention, right? So I was just reading this book. The author's name is Lynn McTaggart, and she does the intention experiment. And what I was reading was also The Power of Eight. And she is all science. She is not woo-woo at all. And she tries to make that very clear. Wow. And she's trying to see why, when we come together in big groups, can we start to see actual and profound scientific changes in health, in wellness. They did it on fetuses. So like a fetus is not yet thinking, why are they healing with our prayer is vibration, intention. So I do think that intention plays a big role, but also, as we see with frequency, sound can change things as well. And if the listeners haven't heard of cymatics, they've sort of measured the way that sound moves. They'll take, so for example, a speaker, and they'll put some sort of plate atop the speaker and throw either like sand or salt, or they've done this in water, that you start to see the vibrational patterns of sound. And so the sound itself creates almost like sacred geometry, like symbols and imagery. So all of this stuff weaves, and I just think it is like the ultimate hack to wellness when we start to understand the language, the frequency, the nervous system. Like, this is my formula for, complete and optimal healing.
Yeah. So cool. Thank you for sharing some of more the science behind these things, especially that book that you're reading sounds really interesting. I want to go dive in.
And she's great because there are, there is that still population, and I think that's fair, that want the evidence behind it. And so if we have the science now showing what is woo-woo, she is like making sure through and through and through that there is not, that everything is like provable, repeatable. It's brilliant.
Well, and I mentioned that once or twice on the podcast before. It's like, there's a lot of studies that have happened in the past 10, 20, 30, even just 100 years, which is still like new when it comes to scientific method and documentation. But just the fact that they're able to continue to prove these, and it's a growing body of work, I think is super fascinating. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
And I think in that same vein, that the more people that are in tune, and this is like the quantum science-y stuff, that as soon as we start to give more attention to something, it starts to grow or it starts to change. Right. So this movement that you're seeing, whether it's in community building or music or creativity or deeper healing, we are expanding that, and it spreads just the same as everything else. So I always try to remind people that there's evidence of everything everywhere. And I'm just going to touch on the nervous system one more time, because when we are So this goes back to polyvagal theory, so that science of safety and danger. But it's called the still face experiments. And the still face experiments, we basically take a neutral face. So I would just be here with this neutral face. And we manipulate, let's say, your system to either that stress state or that safety. And we use breath. So if I had you like breathe really fast or hyperventilate, we're going to activate that stress system. Okay. And so from that stress system, if you're looking at my very neutral face, you might say like, oh, she's so mad, or what did I do? Something is wrong. And you're like scanning through the Rolodex of, you know, what could go wrong, because in that danger system, we've activated the search for danger cues. Now my face is neutral. So this is one of my favorite things to reference.
Yeah.
So we take your same system. Now we activate your parasympathetic system, your safety system. My face has not changed. Still face. But from that still face, you might, I don't know, is she a vegetarian? What does she do for fun? I'm so curious. She's so interesting. Yeah. So from the very same thing, we pick up different cues based on that system. And so that is just another way I think that is so important to have people see that there's evidence of everything, especially when things are neutral, and we're actually reading the cues differently. And so we have this great, huge, growing wellness community, healing community, ways of activating that. And those experiences that we've had are true. And there is a lot of chaos in the world. And so if we can pick and choose intentionally to grow more of one than the other, that's going to lead to wellness too. It's not saying that isn't true or that isn't happening, but how do I prime my body for optimal wellness so then I can move into those other systems momentarily and then come back, you know?
Yeah, I love that. What I took from that is like, get curious. And I mean, that feels like it's almost skipping the body, but it's like maybe that could help to trick the mind into shifting the body.
Yes. Oh, totally. Right. Because that curiosity, like my prompt to people is, what if that's not true? Right. So we believe this thing, and typically those things are not in our best interest. You know, it's our insecurities, it's a wound, it's a fear, it's a worry. And all of that is true. But what if it wasn't? Like, what does that mean? And then, so this goes into the last layer of what I do is like the functionality of the thoughts, the beliefs, the mechanisms. They all serve function. So if I had to disprove that, what would I have to give that attention to then? Oh, then I'd have to write that article, or I'd have to create that post, or I'd have to share my work, or I'd have to sing this thing, or tend to the relationship, or apply to the job, or whatever it is, you know? So when we ask those questions of like, okay, here's the belief system, but what if it wasn't true? What would you have to tend to? And that's playing with the gas and the brake on the things that we really desire, we're also afraid of. And so how do we move towards things that we are afraid of? And here's that nervous system again, and that safety and danger. How do I start to convince my body that it's okay to move towards it and learn how to tolerate all of the feelings that come with performing, you know, doing the thing?
Yeah. Or even
that is safe. It's just uncomfortable. It's not dangerous.
Science or whatever. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
So danger is not discomfort. It is uncomfortable, but we really want to learn how to discern what is dangerous, like actually dangerous, immediate and imminent danger, and just like, oh, I still want to throw up and this is so uncomfortable and I'm not good at it, but it's not dangerous. So we want to start to convince that body that it is okay to move towards some of those things, asking the question and having the conversation and asking the promotion, you know, like applying to the job, speaking to the whatever it is. So that's where wellness is that the body can access all of those things. Once we teach it, it's not dangerous. To a young system, it might have been, right? To an infant, to a 2-year-old, to a 4-year-old, to a 7-year-old, it might have been dangerous.
Yeah. But not anymore. So that sounds, I mean, maybe it could be called this as well, but very similar to like inner child work.
Exactly. But I do inner child work to the nervous system. You know, it's like that is the way that the body is communicating to us. It's taking those memories and experiences And it's like, hey, remember that? Like, we don't want to do that again. That didn't work out so well, you know. But here it's like, okay, we have a skill set, we have resources, we have people we can resource, we hopefully have a support team or system, or, you know, that it's not actually dangerous, and we don't actually get better at it until we kind of confront it. And that's what all of this podcasting is for me, and speaking and sharing my work. That, and there's reason for it, but speaking publicly was dangerous. Putting my face out there was dangerous. And so my body intuitively knows, like, don't do this. And so to find myself here, like, this work in real time is doing it all. And just like, it's uncomfortable as anything, but it is not dangerous. And in fact, it's really important for me to share this, you know?
Yeah. And you have your own podcast, Align with Love.
Yeah.
When did you start that?
So I started that probably a year and a half ago, maybe. And it was in efforts to share my work more broadly. So as a therapist, like post-COVID, it was just so much that I was like, I have to teach people in such a greater way. And even in that, you know, so much of my work during COVID was, that was the ultimate danger, right? We could die. Be careful, you might die. Don't get this, don't spread it, don't share it, stay home. So isolation is like reverse engineering sickness. When we create isolation, that is so bad for our wellness. Like, community building is reverse engineering wellness. Connection, the same thing. So we can start to reverse engineer this. But if you've taken anything from today, that nervous system, when it is in survival, it doesn't need immune system. So here we are trying to fight sickness in a state of survival. That's never going to work. You know?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. I definitely found ways to still connect with people, and you know, and intuitively, I just was like, this, I'm not gonna isolate. Sorry, like
right.
I just was like, that doesn't seem right, you know.
But see, you're still connected. So that speaks to your system that still has that intuition online. So when we're in deep survival, we don't need intuition, right? Because it's just like impulse. But logic is offline, right? Like, logically, this doesn't make sense to like be disconnected from everyone we know. You know, so again, turning those systems back on, like critical thinking. How are we going to do that in a survival state? So I'm not saying anything other than when we can teach our body that it is safe to be in its safety system. So many systems are going to turn back online. That is going to create optimal wellness across the board. And when we do that, it's amazing how I watch people step into not just the relationship that they want, they step into the career they want, the success that they want. Right? Like, we're teaching the nervous system and building capacity to hold success. We want it, but we have to work with the nervous system to be able to hold it. We can't add more to a system that is overwhelmed or flooded out, I call it, you know? So everything is going to start to come back in, and your frequency is going to change. Like a radio station channel, we tell that system it's okay. It's going to start to draw in more of what creates optimal wellness.
So cool.
This is all just like how my brain has learned to interpret what I watch and see in front of me over 2 decades. You know, it's just, these are patterns, and I'm watching how the body is functioning and how the brain starts to move in those states. And then I do the study, but so much of it is observation, putting patterns together of like, oh, this is too weird to not be true, you know, and now it's all backed by science. So it's beautiful.
I was going to say, like, what advice would you give to someone who is dysregulated? But I think that's one, we've already talked about it, because it's like checking in with yourself, right? But maybe there's another angle where people don't recognize that they're dysregulated. Like, what are some things to look out for? Like, maybe things are getting really exciting with work, things are ramping up, but it's also chaotic and stressful. Like, is there like a common thing that you see for people where
So I think
it's really, they need it the most to start, checking in. I think that's, in general, we should all be checking ourselves, right? But yeah.
I'd say the easiest thing to tune into is like the metabolic functions of the body. Are we sleeping? How are we sleeping? We see dysregulated sleep. Are you digesting? We see dysregulated systems, IBS, our body, we're eating all of the healthy things, but we're not losing that stubborn weight, or weight isn't coming off. Okay, well, then something else is not communicating. So there are some of those like more obvious tension in the body, right? That's an easy one to tune into. But I was going to say something just a little bit deeper than that, tuning into like that functionality of, I call it like my new symptomology, is when you're triggered, right? We can really tune into when we're triggered. And so I think that holds a lot of the insight and information of systems trying to communicate with us. I say this with anxiety. I say this with depression. I say this with anytime you're feeling that activated. So you and I are sitting in a room together and someone comes in and they do this thing and you're like, you're super triggered and I'm not, or I'm super triggered and you're not. Why? My body is trying to signal something to me. And so we start to dive into like communicating with those as well. What are you trying to tell me? There's something here. This is where we go. So that's like the deeper work. Yeah. So I'd say definitely like the symptoms of sleep. How is your sleep? How is your digestion? Anxiety would be a great one. And being triggered. Those are like great systems to see, like
the why are we being triggered?
Yeah. That's like my favorite work is like we're going there.
Well, it almost feels like those are the moments that it's like you can get exponential clarity, or if you do sit with it or work with it, then you really can have a breakthrough.
Because that, like when I talk about my work, I call it rewiring a lot of times. It's rewiring the nervous system for sure, but that brain-body connection, it's all centered around that, what the brain is picking up. And a lot of those experiences that we've had when we were younger, our brain doesn't fully develop until we're in our late 20s, right? So I say not that those things didn't happen or weren't true, but there could also be a lot of misinterpretations in some of those experiences. So I might have internalized it as something very different than what it actually was. Because to a young person, I don't know, I always use the example of like, you guys are throwing plates and I didn't clean my room. It's because I didn't clean my room. So now everything has like complete order, or how the body has learned to adapt to navigate some of those circumstances. That was its survival. That was its mechanism. But if we start to unravel that again, what if that wasn't true? What if your interpretation of that was incorrect? That is signaling to you now it's trying to seek resolve. And so it's going to show up in a lot of these symptoms that I would traditionally see. So when we rewrite it, it's like, okay, what if that isn't true? What does that mean then? That means you're free to dress however you want and act however you want and, step into those roles and have that relationship and attract that abundance, be successful. Ooh, but that's scary. And then the body goes back into that contraction. So we start to just really train it, is the word that I use in my coaching. So we're training it to move in a way that we want. So with adaptations and how the body adapts to survive, it can adapt at any point, right? So we call this neuroplasticity. We're using the same mechanism, but now we're just training it to move how we want it to. So it becomes super profound at a certain point.
Awesome. Yeah. But I have to ask you, because I always ask everybody this question. We've talked a lot about vibration, and that is kind of the foundation of everything. Bringing it back to the music side of things, is there a song or potentially more than one song that has helped shape you in some way, or that has changed your life or even saved your life in some way?
It's funny. I go to some of the artists that I will go see live, right? So like I listen to a lot of music. And so I'm like, that's a really hard question. But what stands out to me the most, there's an artist that I love. His name is Trevor Hall. And so I have a lot of his albums that I love, but there's a specific song that he has called More Than Love. And so much of my work is in that heart space, that the heart becomes this sort of healing space. And in the symbol of my work, it's two triangles that one has a bigger base at the top and points downward, and the other has a bigger base at the bottom pointing upwards. And really, it's the symbol for Anahata, is the heart center. In Sanskrit is translated to the sound unstruck, right? So to me, I've always seen that as the symbol of these two triangles that seemingly are separate, but if the sound is unstruck, that they're a part of each other, right? That they are one. So the two triangles, like visually, if you look at it vertically, it's what's above us and what's below us kind of meeting at that heart center. And then I turn it on its side, and like what is behind us, all of that ancestry and experiences, and what is in front of us, all meeting at the heart. So More Than Love, to me, it just speaks to, he gets into the fears that you can like visibly feel and see, and the shadows, and just tapping into that heart space to purify the eyes. So it's almost like he's created a song to match the work that I do. That's so cool. Our vision changes when we can access that heart space. To access that heart space, we need that nervous system. But so I just love
That's awesome.
that we came for More Than Love.
Shout out Trevor for writing it.
Yeah, shout out Trevor Hall.
That's so cool.
And the other artist that I love, 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 and I always will go see, and his work is so uplifting, is Michael Franti. Do you know Michael Franti and Spearhead? So one that stands out to me is called Brighter Day. And he really touches on the realness of like, don't give up when your heart is hurting, and don't give up in all of these scenarios, and not just the vibration of that you can feel, but the way that he moves in that song, that it can lift us up and out of it. It's a little more upbeat. And so it always is just like, if I'm feeling down, I'm right away going to Michael Franti, and it is just like, okay, I'm alive again. And he's got a ton of songs that are just like, will lift me out of anything.
Yeah, good vibes. He
does so much with music.
Yeah. It was like a world instrument shop. This was 10 years ago. I don't know if it's still there, but I remember going in, and it was really cool. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, I think I bought a little rattle shaker or something. But
yeah. And him and his wife, they do a lot of music, or a lot of creation around like giving music to kids. I know they have, I think it's a retreat space in Bali as well.
Yeah, I saw that too.
But I think they have a nonprofit that is centered around music and making it more accessible.
Okay, so one day we'll get my on the podcast. That's the goal.
Yes, that would be amazing.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, but I love how, even just for the listeners to see, like how when you speak to, we've just like changed the channel from like intellect to creative and inspiring, and both of our faces just like lit up, and we started smiling, and it changes the frequency.
And
Exactly. We just like turned on that channel, and that's how quickly you can change your body when you start to use music, sound, frequency, and really tap into that connection. Yes. Yes. I love it.
And you have a group online that you, the space that you support people. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So thank you for that. The space is sort of this community offering space, and it's kind of going through a little rebrand at the moment. I'm actually going to be showing up there more than I think when we started chatting. I was bringing in providers, and they'll do more of like pop-ins, but I've seen so much in the vein of, through insurance and accessibility and higher copays and higher deductibles, so many people turning down services that they really need. So I've created the space that is a virtual and pop-up platform where we're going to go into more of like, I call it internal mastery. So we'll have support groups and education and ways to connect that you can drop in. It's, low commitment. It's very people-centric. So I think for me is bringing the humanness back to a lot of these spaces. So I have 20 years of education. I have a business that I run, and it's just like but I'm still Erin, and this will happen on this level. Healing happens on this level. So bringing this work just back to the people, where, I think that it's needed in the world. And you do so much with community too. So I think even just being around people doing the same work and trying to learn the same things. So I'm just going to come in with different topics and kind of speak to different topics each week, probably like 4 or 5 times a week. So one is like a walk and talk and a support for like the highly sensitive or intuitive and creatives. I'm going to do one with cycle breaking. And so just kind of weaving my work into all of that, just real time. Yeah.
So and we find that through your website?
So it's at this time, it's its own little entity. Okay, it's cool. inthespace.co. And that will have all of that information there of how to log in. We've kind of set it up with an app so it's user-friendly. Awesome. I have a, pop in for your first class discounted. And for anyone listening, maybe what I could do is even create a little promo code that they can use. We'll put it in the show notes. I'll create that. Yeah. And if they find us through the podcast, that I'll give them discount. Just, I want to make this user-friendly, and there's no reason that people should not have access to this work just because of finances and resources,
Yeah.
So that's what that space is for.
So cool.
And then people can deep dive and work with me separately in a different way. We'll go into all of the stuff.
And that's through your practice.
So I'm actually it depends if they're in New York. Yes. Okay. If they're not in New York, we'll go through the coaching, and that just looks a little bit different.
Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, because I have still within my scope, and then, it just gives me so much more freedom when I can reach people more broadly,
Yeah. And everybody needs to try this work at some point. At least the space sounds great if you're just beginning and you're curious. I think that's a really awesome spot to start.
And that's what I figure. Get to know me, get to know my work. We'll start to build community, but this is a brand new, I'm only starting to show up next week. So I'm just recreating it as we speak. And, just
by the time this podcast episode comes out,
yes,
you'll be live, you'll be there. So
I'll be there.
Awesome.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much, Courtney. I appreciate this.
Thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us today. And is there anything else that you wanted to shout out before we closed up here?
Well, just a thank you more than anything. And hopefully the listeners can feel, when I started my own podcast, if you go back and listen, you will hear the shakiness in my voice and the nerves. Maybe, I really was so nervous. And, a year later, just leaning into, and that's my go-to now is when I feel that fear. So here's that system. I communicate with it, and I'm okay, I have to do that. Anytime I feel resistance, I'm okay, as long as it's not dangerous, I'm oh, that's the thing I need to do. I just applied to do a keynote speaking gig in front of all of my colleagues and professionals. And it's a proposal. Maybe I get it. But I'm anytime I feel that fear, it's okay, you're going to learn how to do that and just show up and do it imperfectly, embrace the messy. Yes. And for the creatives listening and the musicians and the artists and whoever else is listening in, to just lean into that. It most of the time is not dangerous. It's just really uncomfortable, So I have infinite gratitude for you for letting me show up today to conquer my fears.
Thank you so much for being so brave. And yes, that is, I had to break through performing anxiety too. It's totally, it's worth it. And it always evolves, right? But yeah, I'll have to go back and listen to the early podcast because you speak so eloquently now. So thank you for coming on and braving your fears. And yes, for all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in today. Feel free to share this message with a friend if it helped you. Let us know in the comments or DM us on social media. We'd love to hear what resonated with you. And if you need breakthroughs, we'd love to share them as well. So thanks so much. We'll see you next week. And until then, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise.